If you are actively tracking the geopolitical shifts happening in the world right now, the challenge isn't finding information.
Right, there's absolutely no shortage of that.
Exactly. The challenge is filtering out the noise. You want a clear understanding of what is actually happening on the ground, but you really don't want to get bogged down by the sheer volume of conflicting intelligence.
Or the partisan spin, which is everywhere.
Yeah, exactly. And that is exactly what we're doing today. We're looking at really a masterclass in the modern fog of war, specifically focusing on a highly volatile situation in the Gulf. We're going to unpack a series of conflicting reports regarding attacks on critical water infrastructure across the Middle East.
And the source material we are pulling from today is a recent dispatch from the Geopolitica Economia collection that's published on the KULT Patreon page.
Right.
It provides this incredibly fascinating, chronologically tight window into how state narratives are constructed and how they're deployed.
And sometimes rapidly dismantled.
Yes, rapidly dismantled during a hot conflict.
But before we get into the timeline of, who said what and which facilities were allegedly targeted, we need to lay down a very clear parameter for this deep dive.
Very important, yeah.
The dispatch we are analyzing today deals with an ongoing, highly sensitive military conflict involving the U.S., Israel, Iran, and multiple Gulf states. So to be absolutely clear, we are not here to take a side.
Not at all. We are not endorsing any political or military viewpoints, and we are certainly not validating one nation's overarching narrative over another's.
Right. Our sole mission here is to impartially break down the facts, the public claims, and the subsequent counterclaims exactly as they are presented in this source material.
The goal is just to give you the raw intelligence. That way, you can understand the mechanics of the narrative warfare that's currently at play.
Okay, let's unpack this. The entire news cycle we're looking at was set into motion by a single explosive rumor.
Yeah, and it really came out of nowhere.
It did. The dispatch notes that an Israeli Hebrew-language news outlet, Ynet, published a massive claim. They reported that the United Arab Emirates had carried out its very first offensive attack against Iran.
And the target they named wasn't just some generic military base?
No, it was highly specific. It wasn't a missile silo or a Revolutionary Guard compound. The claim was that the UAE had intentionally targeted an Iranian water desalination plant.
Which is a massive escalation.
Right.
And then the Jerusalem Post picked up that initial report and layered on additional strategic analysis.
Right.
They posited that this alleged Emirati strike was motivated by a need for direct retaliation. The logic driving these Israeli reports was that after facing days of Iranian drone and missile attacks directed at Gulf nations, the UAE had decided to change its posture.
To strike back.
Exactly. Analysts framed this as an undeniable kinetic signal to Tehran that the rules of engagement had entirely shifted.
But if you look closely at the sourcing of this rumor, this is where it gets crazy. A fascinating pattern emerges. The people declaring the UAE's military intentions to the press weren't Emirati officials.
No, they weren't.
The text points out that the sources driving this narrative were anonymous Israeli officials. Furthermore, these anonymous sources claim that this supposed offensive attack only happened after, quote, consultations between Israeli and Emirati officials over the preceding weekend.
Right, so they were sketching out a very specific picture.
A coordinated, allied, regional retaliation.
What's fascinating here is the sheer velocity and weaponization of leaks in modern statecraft. I mean, you have unnamed officials from one nation speaking to the international press about the highly classified, ostensibly offensive military actions of a completely different sovereign nation.
It's wild.
It really forces you to consider the strategic utility of anonymous sourcing during wartime. In the dense fog of war, a strategically placed rumor can cross the globe.
And establish a dominant narrative.
Exactly. It can potentially force the hand of regional allies before a single satellite image has been analyzed, or before a single fact is even verified.
Well, the pushback from the United Arab Emirates was immediate. And they did not issue, a vaguely worded diplomatic clarification. They dismantled the rumor with blunt force.
They really did.
Dr. Ali Rashid Al-Nuaimi, he's the chairman of the UAE Federal National Council's Defense, Interior, and Foreign Affairs Committee. He actually took to X and posted, quote, "This is fake news. When we do something, we have the courage to announce it.
That is a very definitive statement.
It really is.
They completely dropped the traditional diplomatic ambiguity. The dispatch also includes another quote from a separate unnamed Emirati source speaking directly to the Times of Israel.
And they didn't hold back either.
No.
Ooh.
This source labeled the reports outright nonsense. And they went further, explicitly criticizing those, quote, alleged senior Israeli officials for daring to speak on the UAE's behalf. This Emirati source called it inappropriate to spread rumors about the UAE's actions or intentions. It completely reinforced Dr. al-Nuaimi's stance. If the UAE takes kinetic action, they will own it publicly.
And even the IDF stepped in through official channels to formally deny any involvement in this alleged attack.
Right, effectively shutting down the military rumor mill from their end.
Exactly. Just imagine it. It's one thing to find out your neighbor borrowed your lawnmower without asking. It's another entirely to wake up, pour your morning coffee, and read in the international press that your neighbor just volunteered you for a preemptive regional war.
It's a surreal scenario.
The diplomatic whiplash of that morning perfectly illustrates the chaotic nature of controlling your own state's narrative during an active conflict.
It highlights just how vulnerable a nation's strategic posture is to outside narrative interference. But, you know, the UAE's response wasn't just about denying a military strike. There was a very calculated philosophical distinction woven into their pushback.
Right, the quote to the Jerusalem Post.
Yes. Dr. al-Nuaimi made a broader statement asserting that the UAE will, quote, never lump the Iranian population together with the Iranian regime. He essentially positioned the Iranian people themselves as the primary victims of their own leadership.
And that is a very deliberate line to draw in the sand, while missiles are actively crossing your airspace.
It is. If we connect this to the bigger picture, it maps out the UAE's incredibly delicate balancing act. They are attempting to maintain a rigorous public distinction between Tehran's leadership and the Iranian citizenry.
While under fire.
Exactly, all while simultaneously absorbing continuous kinetic attacks originating from Iranian territory. It is a highly nuanced diplomatic posture operating in an environment completely devoid of nuance.
You can really see that duality when you compare their diplomatic channels to their military reality. The text cites an Axios report noting the UAE Foreign Ministry firmly affirmed its right to self-defense, while simultaneously stating they haven't made any decisions to alter their current defensive strategies.
They are holding a very specific line.
They really are. On March 2, the UAE took formal bureaucratic action. They summoned Iran's ambassador to deliver a protest note. They explicitly condemned terrorist attacks on civilian sites, specifically listing airports, ports, and residential areas.
That formal protest note is the traditional machinery of statecraft.
Right.
It's functioning exactly as designed, but operating in stark contrast to the physical reality playing out in the skies above them.
And that diplomatic posturing makes sense when you look at the sheer mathematics of what they are defending against right now.
The numbers are unbelievable.
Let's look at the raw numbers from this 9-day window. Here's where it gets really interesting and terrifying, honestly. The text outlines the staggering scale of this escalation, noting that a U.S.-Israeli bombing campaign against Iran began on February 28.
Right.
And in the days following that date, Iran launched hundreds of ballistic missiles, cruise missiles, and drones at Gulf states. Hundreds.
The volume of incoming fire is just an immense logistical strain. The dispatch breaks down the interception statistics from just one single day, Sunday.
Just one day.
Yeah. The UAE Defense Ministry reported their air defenses intercepted 16 out of 17 incoming ballistic missiles.
Wow.
And simultaneously, they intercepted 113 out of 117 drones detected within that exact same 24-hour window.
A 96% interception rate against a drone swarm of that size is a profound technological feat.
It really is.
But the sheer financial and logistical burn rate of maintaining that defense grid is staggering. You are launching highly sophisticated, wildly expensive interceptor missiles to knock down waves of comparatively cheap, mass-produced drones and ballistics.
It represents a massive sustained stress test of the Gulf's integrated defensive infrastructure. A coordinated swarm attack of that magnitude is often designed specifically to map radar blind spots.
Right, or to deplete interceptor stockpiles.
Exactly, and to exhaust the personnel manning those batteries. And crucially, even with an interception rate hovering near perfect, the law of averages dictates that some projectiles will inevitably breach the net.
Which brings us to the human cost on the ground, because the UAE has suffered casualties despite that defensive umbrella. The dispatch reports the death toll from Iranian attacks in the UAE rose to 4, with another 112 people wounded. But the text includes a specific demographic detail that completely recontextualizes those casualties.
It does.
All 4 of the fatalities were foreign nationals. They were individuals from Pakistan, Nepal, and Bangladesh.
That statistic is a stark reflection of the region's socioeconomic architecture. The economies and physical infrastructure of the Gulf rely overwhelmingly on migrant labor.
Yeah.
These are the populations building the cities, maintaining the facilities, and staffing the logistics networks.
They are individuals who traveled thousands of miles for economic opportunity. And they are the ones absorbing the kinetic reality of a geopolitical conflict they have absolutely no part in.
Exactly.
The statecraft happens in boardrooms and embassies, but the actual fiscal collateral damage of these intercepted and successful strikes falls disproportionately on the most vulnerable, largely invisible populations working in the region.
It really forces a reevaluation of who actually pays the price when a quote-unquote contained regional conflict involves hundreds of daily projectiles.
So what does this all mean for the core premise of the dispatch? We initiated this analysis by looking at a rumored UAE offensive against an Iranian desalination plant. We established that the UAE vehemently, publicly denied launching that attack.
Right, they shot that rumor down completely.
But the underlying reality, detailed in the text, is that critical water infrastructure is, in fact, being actively targeted in this war.
The infrastructure itself has transitioned into a legitimate theater of conflict. The dispatch details a declaration made by Iran's foreign minister that same Sunday. He confirmed that an Iranian desalination plant on Kosh Island was actually damaged.
But not by the UAE.
Exactly. The Iranian claim was that it was hit by a U.S. airstrike, not by Emirati forces. And the foreign minister attached a very specific, ominous warning to that claim, stating on the record that the U.S. set this precedent, not Iran.
The invocation of a precedent is chilling diplomatic language.
Oh, absolutely.
And the immediate consequence of that newly established precedent materialized almost instantly. The text reveals that Bahrain subsequently reported its own desalination plant was hit by an Iranian drone.
Right.
According to the timeline in the dispatch, this marked the very first time a desalination plant had been successfully hit during this entire 9-day escalation.
This raises an important question regarding the fundamental fragility of the region's supply chains. The Gulf is one of the most arid environments on Earth.
Yeah, water is everything.
Desalination plants are not secondary logistical hubs. They are the absolute baseline requirement for human habitation in these nations. Millions of civilians rely entirely on the continuous, uninterrupted operation of these facilities for their daily drinking water.
And unlike mobile missile launchers or hidden command bunkers, a desalination plant is a massive, sprawling industrial complex.
You can't just hide it.
No. It is a highly combustible network of intake pipes, chemical storage, high-pressure membranes, and dedicated power grids. You cannot camouflage it, and you certainly cannot move it. It is a completely static, uniquely vulnerable target.
When a state decides that water desalination in a desert environment is an acceptable target for a drone strike, they are no longer just degrading an adversary's military readiness or industrial output.
Right.
They are directly threatening the fundamental survival infrastructure of an entire civilian populace. The threshold for what constitutes an acceptable target in a hot conflict is eroding in real time.
Let's briefly retrace the tactical map we've covered from this single dispatch. We began with a highly publicized, anonymously sourced rumor of a UAE offensive strike against Iranian water infrastructure.
Which we saw dismantled.
Right. We watched that narrative get dismantled by the UAE's blunt public denials and their insistence on owning any kinetic action they actually take. Then we analyzed the sheer logistical terror of the 9-day war processing over 100 drones in a single day.
The scale's just unmatched.
And we recognized the tragic reality that migrant workers are the ones bearing the fatal costs of the crossfire. Finally, we arrived at the stark truth that regardless of the initial rumors, desalination plants are now taking direct, confirmed hits from both U.S. and Iranian forces.
In the dense fog of war, tracking the exact, undeniable origin point of a specific strike is incredibly difficult. And the narratives deployed around those strikes are often as strategic as the weapons themselves.
That's the real narrative warfare.
Exactly. Our objective today was to equip you with the factual claims and counterclaims exactly as they exist in the source text, allowing you to view the mechanics of the conflict without validating the underlying truth of the specific military assertions.
We want to ensure you have the analytical framework to read through the noise.
And consider this as you synthesize these events. If the basic unmovable infrastructure of human survival, the facilities that literally manufacture drinking water for millions of people, is now considered a legitimate theater for geopolitical retaliation, what happens to the very concept of a civilian zone in future conflicts?
It's a dark thought.
Are we entering an era of warfare where the environment itself and access to it is the primary hostage?
It fundamentally changes the calculus of global conflict, something
Right.
for you to definitely mull over. Thank you for joining us for this deep dive. Stay curious, keep critically evaluating your sources, and keep questioning the narratives behind the headlines. We will catch you next time.